But if you look at these places, I mean, in Palestine for over 50 years, there's about 30,000 people have been killed. About 7,000 of them are Jews. So looking at the numbers now, you're looking at 23,000 to 7,000. That's what's there. Now, if you look the same in places like Kashmir, and this is not to say that the Muslims don't have their crimes, and this is something that the Muslims don't like to admit. And this is part of the problem, because many Westerners and many other people, they look at the Muslims and they say you're in denial, forgetting that denial is a big river in the Muslim world. In Egypt, denial. So the Muslims do succumb to this denial of the fact that there are atrocities. I'll give you one example. In the state of Syria, there were more people probably killed in Hama by the Syrian government against Syrians than in the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, I think it's tragic that Muslims would actually hold up a picture of a man who modeled himself after Stalin. But this is unfortunately the pathetic condition that many of Muslims have fallen down to. That it's tribe, not truth. Do you see? And in the end of the day, Islam is not a tribe. And the Quran very clearly states, be with the truth even against your own tribe. That's what the Quran says. The Quran says, stand with the truth even against yourself. وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. And that's why I think Muslims need to be brutally honest. We need to be brutally honest. And this is consistent with our worldview and with our ethics. And until we do that, it's very difficult for us to really address other people's about their honesty or lack thereof. I think Muslims really, and the more honest we are, the more palatable our grievances are going to be for other peoples. But I think it's very important. So I think a type of fairness needs to be on all sides. That we need to really be much fairer, you see. And that's why there are Jews in America that are extraordinary in their condemnation of the injustices. There are even Jews here in Great Britain. And they should be supported. And those people, I consider them brave people. And the same is true for Americans that are willing to stand up and speak the truth. Those people should be supported. And this is very important because I think another major problem with the Muslim world and also with the West is the tragedy of what is known as collective guilt. And this is a Marxist concept. It's holding all of the capitalists guilty for the sins or crimes against the proletariat. This is very alien to the Islamic tradition. The Quran says, "La taziru waziratun wizra ukhra." One soul does not bear the sins of another. One soul does not bear the sins of another. You cannot hold a people to account. And that is why to hold the Spanish people to account for the Spanish government's position on certain things is absolutely unfair and unjust. Overwhelming majority of Spanish people were completely against the war in Iraq. To take the people to account for that is absolutely unjust, and to take even the government to account for that outside of state-sanctioned positions is absolutely unacceptable in a civilized world. And Islam is a religion of civilization. And that is why Muslims traditionally have always worked within the law. They have never worked outside of the law. And we recognize what is known in Islam as al-adala al-mushtaraka, shared justice between Muslims and non-Muslims. We recognize that. I mean, if we didn't, we couldn't live together, we couldn't trade, we couldn't have commerce, we couldn't do anything. So we recognize that. So it's very important that Muslims and peoples in the West, Western Muslims, reject this concept of collective guilt. I mean, I stood out in very cold weather in London with about 1 million, mostly British people, and even people that came from Scotland, for 5 hours. And those were people, 1 out of every 60 people in the United Kingdom saying, not in our name. And I think that represented the majority of people in Great Britain. And I think that many of the people here are decent and good people, and I think the Muslims need to recognize that decency. There are elements within this society that are unfortunately very misguided, very misled, the racist element that exists within the society. But I think this society has made immense strides to overcome racism. And that is an Islamic quality. You want to see how we view the world? The Muslims view the world as a world in which races are to be honored, Races are to be seen as a sign of God. The Quran says that in your colors, your complexions, and in your tongues are signs of God. So these are things that we all have to recognize here, that we have made great strides. That there are certain principles and ideals in the West today that were the dreams of philosophers centuries ago. That they have become common knowledge amongst common people. And we cannot allow a minority within these societies or a minority within other societies to destroy those qualities, to destroy those things that all of us share as ideals and principles. And I would say that Islam is absolutely congruous with the highest ideals of Western society. I really believe that. And even in the secular position, if you look at the Archbishop of Canterbury, when he spoke out against certain aspects that he felt were troublesome, he was voicing his own conscience. And that, in essence, is what the great scholars of Islam have done. The great scholars of Islam fled from government. They never wanted to be part of government. Abu Hanifa died in prison because he refused to enter into the employment of government. The Muslims always saw that government, by its nature, the ground of government is compromise. And the ground of religion is principle. And religion is unshakable. I mean, if you want to use an alchemical model, in alchemy you have this idea of mercury and lead. And you use these two elements to transmute things. Well, mercury is a very mercurial substance. It doesn't have any, you can't hold on to it. That's the way politics is. Politics is mercurial. One day you're against the referendum, the next day you're for the referendum. And that's the nature of politics. And politicians will always do that. You know, party line. Politicians don't speak from their conscience, with rare exception. They speak party line, whether they believe it or not. Religion is the ground of principle. Religious people are principled people, and they cannot in any way compromise those principles. And that is why I really believe that historically, the closest analogy in the West that I can see of the Muslim scholar, somebody like Martin Luther King, was never part of the government, but always spoke the truth as he saw it to the government. And this was the highest ideal within the Islamic scholastic and spiritual tradition. Thank you very much. And I would just like to finish by saying that I really believe that we're either in death throes or birth pains on this planet. And I do feel that in the end of the day, God has given us choice, but we need to really take that seriously and begin to change the way that we're doing things. An immense amount of change needed. There's an immense amount of activity from yourselves of really getting involved. Those of you that have children, like myself, I think we see things very differently because we have a responsibility to fend off skepticism, to fend off those negative voices out there that are saying this is the world and there's nothing that can be done about it. I don't believe that, and I don't think it's fair to my children. I want to live in a better world, and I want to contribute to making the world a better place, not just for my children, but for the children of Adam. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.